I was aware that I lived in a totally, completely segregated place and that the majority of the population were very unkind. My mother and father loved me dearly. That gave me such confidence. So when I went out and met other people, if someone saw me and didn't like me, that was their problem, not mine. Because if these two marvelous people loved me so much, I must be okay.
There was a full house in Kiel Auditorium on that night in December 1956. The ball went up, and Bob Pettit of the Hawks and I jumped for it. I got it. Coon, go back to Africa, you baboon. Watch out, Pettit. You'll get covered with chocolate. Black nigger. There was no doubt who the fans were yelling at. I was the only Negro athlete on either team.
Bill Russell was a revolutionary basketball star in the 1950s and 1960s. He spent his whole career with the National Basketball Association team, or NBA, the Boston Celtics. Russell was known for being the best defensive and rebounding center of all time. Russell revolutionized the Celtics and the NBA after getting drafted in 1956. He would start their first dynasty by leading the Celtics to 11 championships in 13 seasons. Despite being the greatest winner in his sport, he was mistreated in the city that he played for and identified with. The racism that Bill Russell experienced during the early stages of his career highlight how deeply embedded racism was in American society, and that success did not guarantee respect for black athletes. When Russell was drafted, racism was still deeply embedded in the United States. Russell was entering a league where black Americans were fighting for basic rights and respect. The civil rights movement of the 1960s was just beginning. The civil rights movement was a movement with influential black figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, who advocated more rights for black Americans. One of the most famous movements during the Civil Rights Act was the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Before being drafted to the NBA, Bill Russell played for the University of San Francisco and was absolutely dominant. He was their star player and led them to the university's only two national championships in 1955 and 1956. In a Slam magazine article, Russell said, "In 1955 at the University of San Francisco, my team went 28-1. We won the Final Four. I was a first-team All-American. I averaged 20 points and 20 rebounds, and a lot of blocked shots, which they didn't count at the time. I was named the NCAA Tournament Most Outstanding Player. Yet at the Northern California Sports Banquet, they picked another player, a white center with a less impressive set of accomplishments, as Player of the Year. I could have been hurt by that, but rather I simply dismissed that award." This moment will highlight a central theme of his career, that no matter how dominant and successful he was on the court, his success did not guarantee respect off of it. During his time and in the NBA, Russell was never fully accepted by the city of Boston, despite his dominance on the court. In a New York Times article written by Jason Jones, he talked about the Netflix documentary, Bill Russell, Legend, that mentioned some of the racism Russell faced. For example, the documentary cites an excerpt he wrote for the Saturday Evening Post in 1964, where he wanted to purchase a bigger home in Reading, Massachusetts, the town where he had experienced harassment, but would later honor him as a celebrated resident. Being one of Reading's most famous residents didn't mean anything to some neighbors in a different part of town. "The neighbors rejected like hell," Russell wrote. "As an athlete, celebrity, even sure, you're a great guy to have in town, as long as you don't stay close to me." This exposes the deeply embedded racism in a modern American city at the time. Russell was cherished for his abilities on the court, but could not be treated as equal in everyday life. Russell's experiences reinforced the idea that success did not guarantee respect, ultimately highlighting that deeply embedded institution of racism in American society.
But Russell called himself black and was proud of it.
At a time when teams were still traveling through cities that practiced Jim Crow, Bill was someone who stood up and insisted on dignity. And he was willing to speak out.
I left the hotel and I went to a restaurant down the street. The proprietor asked me what I wanted. I said, "This is a restaurant, isn't it? I'd like to get something to eat." He told me no, so I walked.
Russell did not just experience racism during his time in the NBA. It would start before he even entered. In a Slam magazine article, quote from Bill Russell, Russell said, "In the early 40s, when I was 7 or 8 years old, my father drove us to the ice house to get some ice, and a white attendant ignored us while he visited with another white man. We waited for 20 minutes or so, and then the white man drove off. I thought the attendant would come to serve us, as we were next in line. But another white man drove up, and the attendant went to serve him instead." This moment he faced highlights once again the everyday racism Black Americans would face. The institution of racism was deeply embedded into society. Even as Russell began to blossom and grow, the racism never left. It grew. Instead of hiding away from the challenges of racism, Russell chose to tackle it. According to an NBA article written by Kyle Hightower, Russell wrote in his 1966 book, Go Up for Glory, "I believe I can contribute something far more important than mere basketball." Russell would become a massive part of the civil rights movement. He would use his voice and actions to challenge the setbacks Black Americans faced. For example, in a New York Times article written by Jason Jones, Russell famously hosted an integrated basketball camp in Mississippi in 1963 after civil rights leader Medgar Evers was murdered. He also attended the March on Washington in 1963, sitting in the front row, but choosing not to speak because he hadn't done the work of the organizers. Russell didn't just have commitment on the court, he had commitment in the fight against racism. He risked his public image and life by deciding to speak out and take action for what he believed in. Russell would receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2011, the Presidential Medal of Freedom is considered the U.S. government's highest civilian honor, awarded by the President. It is often presented to individuals to recognize a lifetime of significant achievements in arts, public service, science, or other fields, according to Congress.gov website. Racism attempted to limit Russell's power and ability. He did not let it define him. He used his on-court success to fight back. Ultimately highlighting his legacy was not just defined on the court, but in his determination to make change happen.
Reflect with pride on helping change the culture of a sport and the course of our nation.
That was Bill